broadcasting from the Unshackled studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by the Unshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. The date is Monday the 4th of May 2020, known in popular culture as Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. It is 7:05 here in Melbourne, a few minutes late. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube channel and also on Entropy, the YouTube enhanced software. So I've been putting the link in the chat. So if you want to ask myself or my guest tonight a question, you can do so by clicking the link and entering the program where you can ask a question and also send through a super chat. We're also live again on DLive. Regular viewers of WilmsFront are also viewers of the James Fox Higgins show. James is my Uncuckables co-panelist. James's daytime show airs 1 p.m. weekdays, but he also co-hosts another show, the Patriarch Hour with Noah Revoy. So what is the Patriarchy? Most are aware of the word due to modern feminists chanting "Smash the Patriarchy" on their online tweets and various women's marches and slut walks in Western nations. Feminists view the patriarchy as a sinister influence in Western society, where despite the fact that women can pursue any career they want and choose any lifestyle they desire, they are still held back because male privilege exists and power and institutional structures are still male dominated and are influenced by masculine personality traits. But there is an alternative view that the patriarchy throughout history has been a positive force in Western civilization and can resolve many of the social ills plaguing modern society. That does not mean men are superior to women, but they are two distinct complementary genders who together can build societies, communities, produce children and raise families to continue the evolution and advancement of man. When he's not hosting the Patriarch Hour with James, Noah is a life and relationship coach at smv4k.com, which stands for Sexual Market Value for K-selected individuals. Noah's coaching and programs aim to equip clients to find their ideal spouse and foster a community of K-selected rational, red-pilled, straight people to support each other in this quest. He himself is the father of 3 sons. Noah is my featured guest for this WilmsFront episode. Noah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Tim.
Now, I'll start with where obviously your primary business is helping people find mates. And when we talk about mates, it's I'm not talking about the Australian term mating partner, and that the ability for men and women to do that has been significantly curtailed because of the coronavirus lockdown. Obviously, in modern society, the club or the pub in Australia is where men and women mingle together, and then of course there's the online dating world. But obviously you can't meet up in person for a date at a restaurant or cafe or in the park. Obviously, you're in the belly of the beast. So, how have you seen the dating and mating game change during this lockdown period?
For a lot of people, everything is on hold. They're trying to use online dating. But the idea of chemistry is a real thing, especially for women, I think more so than men. Men are very, as long as a woman is not ugly, we'll be open to a date. But for women, they get an immediate sense when they meet a man, whether they like him or not. And it's often not the man in particular that's to blame for this. There's kind of a chemistry there that there is some theories that it has to do with them very quickly being able to sense the pheromones of the man to know whether or not he is biologically compatible with them, so they'll break it off. You can't do that online. You can't create a proper romantic relationship online. And so with social distancing, people are in a real tight spot. They're basically on hold. I think what's going to happen is everyone who's not already in a good relationship is going to realize that this last 6 weeks, 8 weeks is going to be very lonely. It's a snapshot of what their life's going to be like if they grow old alone, and they're going to start looking for a partner again. And I think for men especially, there's never been a better opportunity than what's going to happen after this the quarantine is over. As things start to open up, there's a lot of women that don't need no man until they need a man, and they might suddenly have realized that they need men. And that attitude will filter down to the younger women, to the better quality women as well. So I think we're going to see a societal shift. We're seeing a pivot now.
Online dating, it has progressed over the past 2 decades. It's not just for, to use the crude term, geeks. It allows you to filter the mating pool to find somebody more compatible. And I think most people are tech savvy enough now that they won't get scammed by catfishes. And obviously video conferencing now, I'm not talking about those sites such as Chat Roulette, which I won't go into, but we all know how that ended up. But Skype and Zoom, they allow you to chat with potential dates beforehand, just so you can verify who they are and that they do look like their picture, because we know that a lot of people in real life can look a lot different from their picture. So it has evolved into a form where I think the positives now way outweigh the negatives.
Well, there's an arms race going on between men and women, and women, their ability to deceive using new technology has increased, but so has men's ability to call them on that deception. And so it's a constant arms race. A woman who you don't know and who you don't know her community or her friends, so you can't get a background on her, used to be able to, and a man could do this to a woman too. They could string them any line they wanted. How do you check it? Nowadays, everyone has social media accounts, and you go and you check their social media. Not only that, you check who they're friends with. People can put on a fake face. It's pretty hard to get all your friends to go along with the plan. And so you see, if I've had clients, they said, oh, I'm interested in this woman. She looks okay. She seems okay. She talks a good line. You look, and every single one of her friends are radical feminists. Okay, so why does she choose to put herself in that group? She must have sympathy for their beliefs. She's definitely the best looking one in the group. She's definitely the most normal one, but for how long? And so, that ability that men have now to properly check women out is very powerful. Same with women. They go and they look on the man's timeline, and they see, all he's doing is drinking too much. His friends are all, drinking too much. You go and look at them. You see what they're doing. You see what kind of women they're around, because women judge men based on the kind of men they're around. So women's ability to judge an individual man is not actually that strong, but their ability to judge a group of men is very strong. So they'll look at you and a man, and they'll see who his male friends are. And I know women will reject you if you can't identify clearly through your social media that you have a bunch of good male friends that you trust, like in real life friends. Women take that as a pretty big negative, because they figure if you can't make a friends with a man, how are you ever going to make a relationship work with them?
This is something I've heard you talk about quite a bit, that in order to project is the wrong word, but to demonstrate to a woman that you are capable of being the masculine protector provider, you need to demonstrate that you are well socialized with your own gender before entering into a relationship with the opposite gender.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can't understand another man and well enough to make a relationship with him, that's a bad sign for your ability to bond and to have relationships. Also, how do we know, everyone has the capacity to be deceptive. How does a woman know whether the man is who he says he is? It's because he's accepted by other men who also are giving that same impression. So men will test each other out. If you're in a group of men and you're the weak link in the group, you're going to get basically bullied into being strong. You're going to get harassed until you get strong. And it's a loving harassment, but it will sharpen you and push you into becoming a better man. And you will have to either rise to the level of the group or you get kicked out. And women understand that. And so they know that if a group of men accept you, you've been tested. Historically, the group you belong to was the main, for a young man, especially when people got married earlier, you're in your early 20s, you essentially don't have any actual value. You have only potential value. And the way that potential value was estimated was by what kind of group you were able to be in, either your family or tribe, or your Mannebund, or your martial group that you could join, or your trade union group that you would join. If you joined a carpentry trade or something like this, you could show that you had actual value and demonstrate it. Women, it's not hard for women to demonstrate value. If they're 20, if they're young, they're attractive, they're not crazy, and their parents are married, then probably she's a high value woman who's going to be good to get married to. That she doesn't have to do anything to be there. She just has to exist and not ruin herself. For a man, that's not good enough. We have to do a lot. Well, it takes time to do a lot. And you get a real big jump start on this by being part of a male group. And of course, it's wonderful economically for you. If I don't think I could ever get working at a normal corporation again with all the things that I've written and talked about being so politically incorrect. But if I ever needed a job, I have guys I would phone and I'd have a job by tomorrow. I know people who have standing offers for jobs for me. And it's because I have that link with other men. So it's very important, and women understand that linking, that social network gives men stability.
Despite the advance of modern feminism and gender fluidity, that there are no genders or male and female distinctive characteristics and personality traits, and the rise of homosexuality, we still see that the male-female having children living in the suburban white picket fence community, even though it's been demonized and a lot of people suppress their desires for it, it still comes out. That's obviously the education system has been infected by a lot more cultural Marxism since I was at school. But I remember when I went to school, there were still little girls who dreamed about their wedding days, and were already thinking about, even at that age, 7 or 8, oh yeah, that boy over there, I can imagine being in the white picket fences with him. And it's always at the back of male and females' mind that's where I want to get to, even though I've got this life in the fast lane, career and social life on the scene. It's always in the back there, and you can only suppress it so much and stigmatize it in popular culture to a certain degree.
Well, young girls are put at 4 or 5 years of age. They're put into kindergarten where they have to compete with boys for attention, and the way they compete with boys is by becoming more masculine. And this is pushed on them for at minimum 12, 13 years. And if they go to university, you get another 5, 6, almost eternity of years. How often do they hold a baby? Very rarely. There are a lot of women, the first time they hold a baby is when one comes out of them and the doctor puts it on their chest. It stands to reason that getting almost 2 decades of propaganda to encourage women to compete with men, to be in male spheres, to act like low quality men, basically acting like defective men, they're going to be pushed into this for 2 decades. That's going to affect their instincts. And yet, even with that, with billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars of feminist propaganda, we still have the majority of women wanting children. there are a lot of women that have gone too far. They've damaged their sexual market value, or they've gotten too old or whatever, and they'll pretend they don't want women or don't want children. Of course, if you can't have something, it's emotionally less painful to pretend you don't want it. But women really still have that instinct for children, and it's impossible to take it away. And if we take it away from a percentage of the population, what it means is that percentage won't reproduce. And the next generation that comes up will come up out of the women who are more child-centered, who are more in touch with their instincts and with their femininity.
I'm not sure how much you know about the Australian toxic feminists, but probably the most well-known is Clementine Ford, and she's repeatedly tweeted in the past, kill all men, but she has a male partner, and now she's got a young son, and it's been interesting to see her work subsequent that, where you can see that even though she's built this career on being this radical, she's a third wave feminist, so she believes that trans women are women as well, just to give you a bit of context. But she's now talking about what sort of world she wants for her son. She wants him to be secure in his identity, and it's interesting to note that even somebody like her, who's built this career basically man-hating a lot of the time, how she still can't break away from this maternal instinct she has to care for her son, and by extension I'm not sure if she's married to a partner or not, but it's just been an interesting phenomena to see that even somebody like her can't break away from that type of maternal instinct.
Well, if you think about where feminism comes from, this is the vast majority of cases. Someone will always find an outlier that's different, but the vast majority of feminists, they're not actually angry at men. They're angry at their father, and they're projecting that to all men. You know, if women have a lack of investment from their father into their life, children are born chaotic. Let's start there. Children are born chaotic. Their minds are not well structured or ordered. That's normal. And over time, they learn how to structure their mind, mostly with the help of the father. The mother does some early socialization. However, mothers tend to be very permissive, which they have to be, because babies and very small children cannot behave well consistently. So the mother has to be very, very permissive, because kids will have a lot of outbursts. As they get older, especially past the age of 7, the father starts to take a more active role in shaping the mind of the child and helping the child to have solid boundaries and construct a solid view of the world. With children that don't have enough fatherhood investment, especially with women, what ends up happening is they resent that. Feminists, if you look to them, that the hair is crazy, the clothes are weird. Often there's obesity and other body modifications that go along with it. This is the signs of a damaged and chaotic mind, a mind that never had the structuring influence of a masculine father. Now, this doesn't mean they didn't have a father, although some cases that's true. What it means is the father was not a man that they could look up to and that could structure their mind. So they're angry that they didn't get this. It's almost as if they hadn't been fed well as a child, and their relationship with food now is distorted. A lot of people that starved as children, they end up fat as adults because they overeat to compensate. So you'll see that with, emotionally, they'll over-emote to compensate for not getting enough emotional investment and time investment from their father. And what happens is some of these feminists, like you mentioned, their biological instincts take over. They end up finding a partner, and now they say, hey, I actually have a man that I don't hate. Maybe not all men are evil. Maybe not all men are my father. Oh, and now I'm starting to get someone that helps me structure my mind. What you're seeing is two things. One, you're seeing that her man is helping her to structure her mind, so she's becoming less chaotic. Therefore, feminism appeals to her less. And she had a son, which means that some of her husband and some of her son's DNA gets into her body, gets into her brain, and it actually changes the brain to mimic the brain structure of a man. You'll actually get the DNA from your son and your husband in there. So she's got man brain. Therefore, feminism is not appealing to her. She's getting more structure in her mind. And actually, that is the cure to feminism, is to help women develop agency and structure to their mind, and it just doesn't appeal to them afterwards.
Going further from the feminist that I highlighted, Clementine Ford, you talked about the role of the father in modern feminists. Her father, Clementine Ford, ran in a recent election as a One Nation candidate, which is one of our soft nationalist parties, which is obviously the complete opposite ideology to what she has. And I don't know what life was like in the Ford household growing up, but you sort of, from the outside, maybe she wanted to rebel against her father and her upbringing. That's why she decided to go down this radical feminist path.
But why do children want to rebel? Rebelling against the parents is, children will do that because they feel that the rules of the parents are unfair. And why do they feel they're unfair? Because they feel they weren't applied with love. And I say feel because kids aren't thinking. Mostly children feel, they do very little thinking. Actually, humans in general do mostly feeling and very little thinking, even most men. So if they feel that the rules were unfair, if they didn't feel they got enough love and attention, most people who are in politics ignore their children. That's a pretty common trope. The same with people who are at the highest levels of industry, ignore their children. They might be fine people, but their children are going to feel resentful because their priority in life was their business or their politics or their career. And what ends up happening is the kids then resent the father. They identify anything that the father identified with as being bad, and now they rebel against it. If you were raised with a father with good right-wing values, good healthy values, and you identify with the opposite, your father didn't raise you right. That's just how it is. Or the person has they got a break in the brain. That can happen too. Something's wrong with their thinking patterns. But that's actually pretty rare. 90-something% of cases, there wasn't enough loving interaction between the father and the child for them to absorb the parents' belief system and let it structure them.
Like I said, we don't know what went on in the Ford household growing up. It's just an interesting example to put to you of Clementine Ford, her journey, because it's more complex than a kill all men tweets. Obviously, we've seen with modern feminism, it evolve into the Me Too movement, the Believe All Women, and we're seeing men who engage maybe foolishly in consensual sexual acts with women they might be at various stages of the relationship with, and they're accused of rape, and they go through this traumatic legal process or non-legal process with those kangaroo courts at the universities. But that and the modern attempted social re-engineering of men and women, it deters men from being confident or willing to approach and interact with women. And that's another contributor with the West's declining birth rates, as well as the career socialite lifestyle advocated over the white picket fences way of life.
Yeah, and a lot of young men, again, when young women don't have a father investment, they turn out one way. When young men don't have fatherhood investment, they turn out a different way. They tend to be very timid, or they will overcompensate by being extremely promiscuous and extremely outgoing and forward. One or the other, they'll end up on either one extreme of that spectrum. The way that you avoid having a Me Too moment is to not spend time with women who you cannot check out their background beforehand. So, before I dated my wife, I checked out everything there was about her. I got, I was in the time we were in the same general church, but of course in different countries. And I had my ministers phone her ministers to ask about her. I did a thorough background check on her before I got into a relationship with her. And that's 20 years ago. That's way before the Me Too movement. But I thought, if I want to have a lifelong relationship with someone, I better check them out. If you're chasing new random sex all the time, you're playing Russian roulette. You're eventually going to have someone Me Too you. And the reason is when you're doing that, you're presenting an opening for predatory women. There are predatory women. We think of men as being predators primarily. Men are physical predators. We fight and use violence as our predatory instinct. Women are social predators. They use social power in order to prey on people. And not all women, of course, but women are capable of that, and men are capable of violence. So women are capable of using their social connections, and they understand how to cry on cue, how to look like a victim if they want to. And they can do that very effectively to manipulate the legal system. Now, in turn, they tend to be very easily manipulated as well. I don't think the Me Too movement came out of feminism. I think the Me Too movement was a carefully constructed political tool to weaponize feminists against parties or people that don't support feminism. But it was used as a tool. It didn't really come from feminists, because look, the moment the feminists are told, okay, Me Too about him, but not Me Too about him. He's okay. Yes. Touchy Joe Biden says that, he basically admits on TV the things he's been accused of. We can't Me Too him because we have to defeat Trump, you see. So the feminists don't really believe in the Me Too movement. They're just being used as pawns. When I said that the feminism is the result of a chaotic mind, chaotic minds are easy to manipulate. Structured minds are hard to manipulate. It's like attacking a walled city. You have defenses you have to go through. In chaos, that's an opportunity. Chaos is opportunity. It's an opportunity for people to manipulate. And so they're very easily manipulated, much the same way as you mentioned earlier, the homosexual movement and the transgender movement. They're being weaponized as well because their minds are chaotic and they're easy to manipulate.
You're absolutely right that women are social predators, and their manipulative power is vastly underestimated. They can better use their emotions to their advantage, and the common wisdom is that men are more sexually active, while women don't. Some women have women's sexual needs are different. But they have always been have held what is called they've always been the sexual masters. They have this. They can provide give men the sex, and they know that they can be manipulative, gain things from it by withholding it, and that's another source of their social predatory behavior.
Well, feminism ensured that they lost that power. If you're not a complete loser and you're relatively socially skilled, you can get laid as often as you want if you're a guy. Okay, it's no longer something to brag about that you're able to have lots of sex with random women, because women have become so easy. So they've lost that power. And if you talk to more traditional, more conservative women, they're the first to notice that men don't have much of a desire to commit, because why commit to one woman when there's so many women out there? It's pretty easy. As long you got a job in the age of coronavirus, you got a job and a good supply of toilet paper, you can get a woman. It's not hard. It used to be hard. You remember I said that men are they enter adulthood with very little value aside from their connections through their family and tribe. Well, nowadays, they don't have to do anything to add value to that to actually get a woman. They used to have to add a lot of value, and then they could get a woman. That's why there was a large age disparity in the past. Men would be in their late 20s and women would be in their very early 20s or late teens when they would marry, especially in Northern Europe and Southern. It was take 4 years away from that, basically. This is changing a lot. So women are losing the power of sex. Now, the other thing is that there's a lot of things men can have sex with besides women. And we don't like to think of that, but the sexual market for men is very vast. Just like for women, they have toys. We're maybe a couple of years away from full sex robots, which means that women will lose even more of their sexual market value because they're having to compete. Now, there is two markets. There is the sexual market, and then there is the marriage market. These are not the same markets. Women don't realize that women are always thinking they're in the marriage market when they're actually, they often are behaving as if they're only in the sexual marketplace. Men aren't going to marry, men who are not mentally unstable will not marry a sex doll. If they want to have kids, they're still going to want to have a woman. Even if we have artificial wombs, you need somebody to take care of the child, someone to breastfeed it, someone to give it the kind of love that only a healthy woman can give a baby. Women who want to maintain value, who want to have a good relationship, have to stop competing in the sexual marketplace and focus on the marriage marketplace. That means adjusting their behavior, their lifestyle, their appearance to be attractive to men who are looking for a mother for their children. Because they have no value almost in the sexual marketplace. They're just a commodity to be easily traded for another woman tomorrow. And that's a terrible place for women to be. And, you mentioned something earlier about Karens when we were talking privately. That's where the Karens come from. It's the women who competed in the sexual marketplace unsuccessfully for many years. Yes, sure, they got laid hundreds of times sometimes, but no man wanted to marry them. They end up as a Karen. They end up grabbing the lowest quality man, just somebody with a penis, basically. The lowest quality man they can get just to say they have a man to raise their 2 or 3 kids that they had through the alphas. And they're unhappy about it. It's basically a Karen is a thought that hit the wall.
You're absolutely right that there's a separate sexual and marriage market, and even though we've still, as I said, seen the white picket fence's goal still be what men and women want to ultimately achieve, but the modern mantra has been in your late teens, 20s. That's where you have your fun. That's where you play the game in the sexual marketplace. And when you're in your late 20s or early 30s, that's when you enter the marriage game, and then that's when you settle down. But obviously, for some, that can end badly. And to use a pop culture reference, the Bridget Jones movies, she's a mid-30s single woman, and you see her struggle to find the man, and she's seeing all of her friends around her getting married and having kids. And one of the songs in that film is "All by Myself," where I can't remember who the singer is, but talks about back in the day when sex was just for fun, but those days are gone.
Yeah, it's with that kind of a situation. What happens is the kind of, let's say a woman, and most people are an average of a 5 out of 10 in looks. Let's say a woman is a 6 or 7, slightly above average, and she's 20. She can get a very high quality man who's 28, 27 years old, 30 even, who's already got himself established. Maybe he's bought a house, or he's got a career going, and she's got a very low. She's either by 20, most women aren't virgins anymore, but she's maybe a virgin, or maybe she has a very low partner count. Okay. Now, by the time she's 30 and she's done her million cock march, she's going to be so worn out that none of those 30-year-old successful men will want her. And the guys who are 40 or 50 often are post-woman, like they don't care anymore. And they also understand that they can still probably sleep with the few women in their 30s and 40s that are still good looking and not make a commitment, because they understand how desperate these women are. If a woman wants a good quality husband, she has to marry that man early on. So she has a choice: fun in her early 20s or a good man. She can't have both. It's just not available to her. And the part of the problem is a lot of women think they're going to marry an alpha. They think they're going to marry the dream man that they show on TV. I mean, even in Bridget Jones, she's not very attractive for the kind of men that she's dating in that show. It's completely unrealistic. Those men might pump and dump her, but they're not going to commit to her in real life. In real life, she'd end up with a man who is 2 steps below her, because by the time she's at her age, it's not going to be possible to find a man that's about equal to her, because that man can go marry a better younger woman. And we were too often lying to women and telling them through movies and television that they can screw up for 20 years and still find a man. And it's fraud. We're defrauding women of their youth, basically.
Another pop culture example of what you were just talking about is that show Ally McBeal, which in the 90s about the single female lawyer. So, and obviously the show tries to project that women, although they might not get the white picket fences straight away, they're putting more focus on the career. It's meant to project that female independence, making it on your own, that's more important than that, and that it's okay if you reach 30 and you're still single.
Yeah, a career for 90% of women is working in Starbucks or a cashier at the bank. This is where their career usually goes. There's a reason why women make less money than men. Men, on average, men will tend to go out and push like maniacs for their career, because they understand that they have this 20-30 year arc, and there's a place they can go if they push hard. A lot of women, they have this fallback: yeah, I'm going to get married when I'm 30. And so they're not giving the same level of dedication to their careers. They're never going to get where the men are. And a lot of women just aren't capable of it. They don't have the aggression to compete with men. The reality is, one of the most aggressive fields you can be in is law. That's an extremely competitive field. Very few women have the psychological capacity to, psychological, the emotional capacity to compete with men without it hurting their feelings to the point where they want to drop out. They burn out because it's too emotionally difficult for them. They don't make partner then. So basically their career was they made a bunch of men money. This is why some men, one of the reasons why some men, even in power, promote feminism, is because it's great for their business. Get these women during the flower of their youth, the time they have the most energy. We're going to bring them into our company, get them to work like dogs for us. We're going to pay them a pittance on the hope that they can have a career. And now they're going to be, real independent women. And then we'll dump them when they get in their mid-30s. That happens. A lot of companies end up dumping these women in their mid-30s because the women start becoming very unhappy with their life, which means they're not very productive. On the other hand, men hitting their mid-30s, their life starts becoming awesome. So they become super productive. So they start dumping them and then shifting over to wanting to have male employees instead. And it's really harmful to women. They're basically being used by these fake feminists. These male feminists are using the women.
We've talked about women, the consequences of them playing the sex game in the 20s and then relying on marriage in the 30s. But what about men? What's the danger and damage to them?
So men are more resistant to the emotional damage of, reckless sex, basically. We're more emotionally resistant, but we still have other consequences. Time and energy that we spend chasing women is time and energy we don't spend improving ourselves and making our lives better. Now, of course, there's a trade-off. It's fun, I'm sure. The guys who are sleeping with one, I'm married pretty young, so I didn't go through that stage in my 20s. But the guys who are going through having sex with one woman after the other, I'm sure they're having fun. But they too eventually will become numb. And what they don't realize is that the very best women, they don't want to marry a man who's had, 100 or 200 sex partners. It's very hard to go find a woman with a low sex count at that point. Now, men who've been through that kind of a life, they to some degree understand the thoughts well enough to tame one. And I have seen that happen. I've seen men tame a woman who had a fairly high count, and because they understood it, they understood those women, and they understood how to get them to behave normally, behave in a healthy manner again. And it has worked out. But this is Russian roulette. And nowadays it's becoming even more dangerous. If you sleep with 100 women, and you're definitely going to have at least one try to meet you. It's going to happen eventually. This is not the 1980s where it's literally reckless sex with no consequences, except maybe you get AIDS. But nowadays you have a lot of legal consequences. All you have to do is piss off enough women. They get together and decide they're going to make up some bullshit about you. If one woman Me Too's you, it's not so bad. You get 5 or 6 of your ex-girlfriends try to Me Too you at the same time. Now you have a problem. And the world will believe women over men 9 times out of 10, especially if you're a man who has stood up for yourself. If you're a man who's been in any way not part of the narrative that's promoted by feminism, you're a target. Even feminist men have been targeted by the Me Too movement. There was one in Canada, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, a television personality, and a bunch of his ex-girlfriends who were angry at him for not committing. As I said, women think that the man they're sleeping with is going to commit to them, even though he knows he isn't. They got together and they burned him. And it eventually came out in court that they were making up a story and they were lying. They had no consequences at all. Meanwhile, he spent years defending himself, and all of their lawyer fees were paid for by the state because it was a prosecution. He paid his own lawyer fees. Basically, he got completely screwed over by it, but he put himself in that position to begin with.
You talked about the male feminists, and we've seen, especially in Australia with our Greens party, that obviously the men in their party support feminism, but we've seen a lot of sex scandals there where women who have alleged that other Greens male members have sexually assaulted them. And there is, I'm going to ask you about this theory that male feminists, it's another way. They say that they're male feminists as a way to basically, it's a new wave seduction tactic that, I supported your rights and that I'm with you, and then they make the moves on them, and as we see often in a way that the feminists themselves don't like. Tucker Carlson, the Fox News host, said that he wouldn't want his daughters to date a male feminist.
Yeah, women hate male feminists. Women are turned off by emasculate men, and you can't be a male feminist and masculine. The two things contradict each other. What happens is, I wouldn't even say it's a way of seduction. I would say it's a way of covering up for predatory behavior. It's the same reason that a lot of pedophiles, for example, will try to get into jobs where they work with children. So these male feminists, these predatory men, will use cover to get into groups that, the Green Party is probably 80% women. Those kind of policies are not supported in general by adult, masculine, mature men. So what ends up happening is they say, hey, that's where all of the broken women are, easy pickings for us. And of course, what is feminism? Feminism is the removal of the patriarchy that used to protect women and children. Predators are against the prey being protected. It's a lot easier to attack a group of wildebeests if all of the adult male wildebeests are gone somewhere else. So they want to separate men and women because it makes women and children much more vulnerable. This is the real dark side of feminism. And I don't think that most female feminists understand this because, like I said, they're chaotic-minded people who are being manipulated. But the feminist men, they are the real problem. They are the real predators who are out there, trying to give these women an excuse to get more and more radical so that they're easier and easier to manipulate.
We've had countless examples of radical feminists promoting illiberal policy proposals in response to horrific domestic violence or rape and murder incidents, such as I'm sure you've come across the feminist blogs which have proposed a curfew for men, so that women can walk the street safely at night. And this feeds into the whole thing that women shouldn't have to learn self-defense. We should teach men not to rape. Though if you apply it in a different context, you shouldn't have to lock your doors because you're enabling stealing culture. We should teach thieves not to steal. But going back to the curfew, that of course just takes the good men off the streets. Of course, the bad men are still going to roam the streets at night, and obviously, who's going to help you in an immediate trying to fight off a predator or avoid a predator? It's going to be a strong man himself.
You know who doesn't get raped? Women who go jogging with their husband at night, especially if he's a big, strong guy. That's even a group of men will look at that and say, that's too much work. Very few men are predatory sexually towards women. Most men are opportunistic. If she wants, I go for it type thing. Very few men are predatory. And most men, we should be teaching men to be more violent, not less violent. But that violence needs to be controlled. It needs to be aimed in the right direction. If sexual predators understood that the family of the victim was going to hang them from a tree, we would have less sexual predators, because we have taught men to be so soft. Predators who aren't soft, who have no problem with violence, they're allowed to run free. We've taken the sheepdogs away, left the sheep to the predators, and now we're trying to figure out how to make a law to contain wolves. Wolves don't follow the rules. They do whatever they want. And we're going to have to teach men to become a little more wolf-like again, a little more defensive of their flock, of their tribe, or we're not going to go back into a peaceful situation again. And this idea of basically neutering men, what ends up happening is you just create a dichotomy. The men who are dangerously violent have no way to structure that. There is a discussion of how psychopaths are made, dangerous psychopaths. There is a little bit of it is brain chemistry. So there's some different functions, how their brain works. But part of it is the way that they're raised. So that psychopathy can be directed towards positive things. So they can be taught right from wrong. They can be given clear boundaries, which is usually done by their father. And this allows them to function very healthily in society. And even in some cases where we need hard men who don't have remorse in order to fight our enemies, those men can play that role. But in a society where we have so many weak men, there's no men there to help structure their dangerous tendencies. And so they become wild, they become uncontrollable. And a wolf, you can't tame a wolf, but a dog, a big, powerful dog that is well trained, can be protective of its owners, be protective of its tribe. That same dog raised in chaos is going to be dangerous to everyone, dangerous to the people it's in its own tribe, dangerous to random people. And that's what happens when men aren't raised around masculine men that can help them to structure that. And nowadays, most boys are raised on their own. We got all these single mothers having sex with the most dangerous alpha they can find. They end up having a kid with those genetics, and then they raise him with no control because they have no idea how to manage him. They have no idea how to train him and teach him, because that's not what women do. Men make men, women can't do it. And so we're creating a society of predators and prey. This is not a good situation we're heading into.
And another proposal by the radical feminists was that after a male and female couple break up, the male should be monitored by authorities, have to do some sort of counseling to make sure they don't seek revenge on the woman. But as you were alluding to before, often it's the man who, well, say, like just using a one-night stand, for example, they'll take off in the morning. It's the woman who will pursue the man like, how come you don't want to talk to me again? Screw you, when is more likely to sort of be the post relationship or sex stalker.
Yeah, well, women have successfully used the state to transfer wealth from men to women. So mostly the state exists. It used to be the state existed to protect us to a certain extent. Now it exists almost solely to move money from men to women. So most of the jobs in government are unnecessary jobs created for women so that they will have employment, so that they don't need men. This way they need the state instead. State becomes their husband. There is a tremendous transfer of wealth through the social welfare system from men to women. If you look at statistically, as a group, women don't pay taxes. They only collect money, and men pay all the taxes statistically. And of course, there's going to be outliers to that, but as groups. That's not enough. Now they want to communistically divide up our sexual value between them. Ideally, the women at the bottom of the pyramid, the least attractive, closest to the wall, most overweight, most mentally unstable women, they would like to forcibly have a husband given to them by the state. You know, they want to have control over men. What they don't understand is there is a point where men won't take this anymore. And all of the privileges, women don't have rights in the West, they have privileges. Privileges granted to them by men. And the moment that men decide to take those privileges away, there's nothing women can do about it. Rights only exist if you can defend them. You know, we can say a slave has a right to freedom. That's nice in theory, but if the slave cannot escape its master, there is no right. Okay. We only have the rights we can defend. If you lose a war, your country loses all of its rights temporarily. Maybe the victor will recognize it's in its best interest to give it rights as well. As men, we recognize it's in our best interest to take care of women, to make sure they're healthy, to make sure they're safe, to make sure that they have a good community to live in, to make sure that they have a lot of rights as well. It's in our interests to do that. But if they abuse those rights, really, what can women do to stop men from taking them away? We even say when we gave women the vote that we gave women the vote. They didn't earn it. The men earned it. You know, in the United States, the men, they fought the British government to have the right to vote. They fought in the First and Second World War to have the right to vote. A lot of people don't realize that in the First World War, a lot of the men who were fighting didn't have a right to vote. The franchise was expanded because so many men gave their lives that there had to be a recognition of their investment into the commons, and so they were given more votes. Women never made that sacrifice to society. They never earned the vote, and they're incapable of keeping it if men decide they don't want it. By not cooperating with men and by actually using the rights we've given them to attack us, women are putting themselves in a position where men will become more and more radical. And men will eventually decide that, no, we made a mistake. We have to go back. And there will be a change. And it's, like I say, the adult men are going to make a return. And when daddy's back, somebody's going to get in trouble.
You are correct when and I've observed the same thing, where how modern feminists, they want the state to be their husband. There's the worship of the person in government. Obviously, you're a Canadian, and like you see the modern feminists are gushing over Justin Trudeau. He's won his second term in our state of Victoria. The left, the male feminists and the feminists are all in love with our premier, Daniel Andrews. He's keeping us locked in our homes for our own safety. They're all pleased that husband Dan is looking after them. And obviously over in New Zealand, they think Jacinda Ardern is Wonder Woman, has the woman's touch in basically doing what Daniel Andrews and Justin Trudeau are. There's this worship of the state, and in Australia, the feminists, they're always demanding that the government fund this and that and all sorts of things. And well, as you said, that the state is a form of wealth redistribution from primarily men to women. Obviously, they would say that that's a bad thing, that only the men are allowed to be the breadwinners. But that's where you've come in with you and James's show, the Patriarch Hour, turning it on its head, that the patriarchy is a good thing.
Yeah, the patriarchy exists because it is the optimal system for the management of humans. You know, there was a time in history when we didn't have patriarchies. If you go back far enough, hunter-gatherer societies, the very earliest hunter-gatherer societies, the men and women lived relatively separately. Okay, this is before we understood that when you had sex with a woman and she had a kid afterwards, that was your kid. The idea of it was not really understood in the way that we understand now. We understood women had to have sex to have children, but we didn't realize that meant it was your kid. It took a while for people to make that connection. Once, and when you don't know whose child it is, you don't have much of an incentive to make a investment into that woman. You know, you only trade for sex. So men would, bring some game, share it with the women in exchange for sex. And it was basically organized prostitution that involved every woman that reproduced, because that's how it went. At a certain point, either men or women, somebody recognized that, when I only have sex with one man, that means all my kids are his. And I bet you it was women that figured it out, because they're there at the act of birth. They see the kid. They're like, hey, this is exactly like so-and-so. And he's the only guy I like. And he's the only one I'm having sex with. And all my kids are like this guy. There's got to be some connection here. They recognized that. And as soon as women recognized that, they went to the man and they said, hey, this is how things work. We just kind of figured this out. And the man said, wait a minute, I can invest in my own children, because the investment in the woman is not the investment in the woman, it's the investment in children. Women pick men based on what kind of children they're going to get out of them. Men pick the woman based on how good a mother she'll be. So they say, if I keep this woman exclusively for me, she's going to have my children, which means that when I'm old and can't hunt anymore, they're going to go out. My sons will go out and do the hunting for me. I can marry my daughters to my allies in other tribes, and now we can make alliances. We can make peace. We don't have to fight constantly. Primitive people fight constantly. Let's figure out how to do this in a way where we protect the women. Well, we're going to have to start living with them. Now the patriarchy is formed. The men formed the boundary around society. They stopped bad men and animals from killing the women and children. Think of it like it's the wall, the outer wall perimeter, but it's a wall of men. And they protect, there's a deal with the women. We will protect you in exchange for exclusive access to your reproductive ability. We're going to have kids with you and only you, and you're going to only have kids with us. And we're going, there was a lot of polygamy for men, but not so much for women at that point. And this gave men a good reason to invest into women. It was women, by and large, that are responsible for the creation of the patriarchy. They had a much better deal. It used to be that if you're in a village of just women and children, and some local tribe wants to come and rape all the women and the children, there's nothing you can do about it. You're a skinny little girl. What are you going to do about it? Now the men are living in the tribe with them and defending them, and they're defending them because they have a good investment and a stake in them. They're going to take care of them. They're going to protect them. And people will say, oh, well, women were just property back then. What would you rather be? Property of someone that takes care of you and protects you and loves you and treats you well, or living in the woods by yourself where you're subjected to every kind of predator possible? And that was basically the choice women had. And women preferred the patriarchy. And it was very, and also under that kind of a system, if you were a child growing up without a patriarchy, you were constantly seeing your mother abused by random men. Maybe you were as well, because no one protected children. Primitive cultures are terrible for children. The book The Origins of War and Child Abuse explains that very clearly, how terrible life is for children when men are not protecting the tribe, when that's not got that patriarchal structure. The children are now growing up with less trauma. They're growing up healthier. They have more regular access to meat because the men are there all the time. So the men are always sharing and bringing in their meat. And those tribes meant that the children grew up stronger and healthier and more of them. And they very quickly outcompeted the tribes that didn't use patriarchy and eliminated them. The various migrations of Indo-European people into Europe were essentially waves of more and more and more patriarchal societies, taking over the less patriarchal society before it. More structured societies. Women are not good at structuring young men. Men are. And so suddenly boys, instead of waiting until they hit puberty to leave the tribe and go to the men, they were getting from 7 years old onward, they get another 4 or 5 years of training. And those cultures are able to compete at a much higher rate. And so we have patriarchy because it works the best. We created such a wonderful world for women. You know, we created indoor plumbing for women. Men don't care. Men will go to the washroom in the woods. We don't care. We created indoor plumbing. We created nice, comfy homes. We created cities and beautiful places to live. We did that so that women were safe and children were safe. We made it so safe that women forgot what it was that made them safe. Now, a feminist, if she wants to complain about a man, she's still going to call the patriarchy. She's going to call the emergency services, which is mostly men. They're the ones that bring all the muscle anyway. If it's serious, they send men. If it's not serious, they'll send some female officers. But if it's serious, they send men. They still need the patriarchy. They've just gotten to a point where they don't recognize it anymore.
It's the same with when you reach basically peak prosperity in any society, and well, we're seeing it with the climate kids, that is the consequences of that is basically going to be destroying everything that you currently enjoy about our modern society, and that is what modern feminism is doing in a different way. Also, the feminists have also attacked with about marriage, is that it traditionally was about the woman submitting to a husband in marriage, and the narrative that they put around it is that means that the man could do whatever he wanted to the woman, and she just had to take it. But that is not what it means. It means that a woman, she entrusts the man with her protection and the protection of the family, that it's more a responsibility on the man.
Yeah, back in back when we had a better structured patriarchy, so we've got kind of a national level of men are still doing the work, but there's not the organization we used to have. When you lived in small villages, even 100 years ago, most of us lived in small villages. The cities hadn't yet grown to what they are. And you were a woman and you married a man. If that man beat you, you were going to get a visit from that woman's brothers and father, because the patriarchy, that is the men who were connected with you, their job was to protect you, including from other men in the tribe. And men understood this. They understood you beat your wife, her brothers and husband are going to come after you. On the other hand, if you need help, her brother and husband are going to help you out too. So there was benefits and negatives. Nowadays, after the destruction of the patriarchy, women have no one to protect them anymore. The police don't care because they have no connection to you. They're not going to take the level of revenge necessary to suppress certain kinds of negative behavior. You know, arresting men for domestic abuse doesn't stop domestic abuse. You know, giving them one beating warning and the second time they're going to hang from a tree, that suppresses it. You know, I know people that grew up in certain more traditional countries in Eastern Europe, and he said, where we lived, nobody beat their wife, because if you did, you were going to get beaten by the family. They take you out to the woods and have a conversation with you, and there was no two conversations. There was one conversation, and next time it was more serious. And they didn't have that problem. Negative behavior of men in society is suppressed by the action of other men. The state cannot suppress it. The state can only drive it underground. And that's exactly what happens. Men get better and better at, the abusive men get better and better at abusing rather than actually suffering consequences.
There's a common stereotype in Australia amongst ethnic families that the ethnic sister, the brother will be very protective of her, like, you know, don't hurt my sister. What do you say about my sister? And that's exactly what you're talking about there. That it's there's this whole community. It's not just the husband who's the protector, but also the family or the clan.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, you know, if you're a man and you've got some sons, like I have 3 sons. So what happens if I get in a car accident and I die? Or I get corona and I die? Probably not, pretty healthy. But what happens if something happens to me? Who is going to teach my sons about masculinity? When you're in a traditional culture or a traditional community, your sons have dozens of examples of good men around in order to learn from. So that's not a problem anymore. Your daughters, if I don't have any, but if you have daughters, your daughters get to see what a good man is because they see their grandfather, they see their uncles. They even see the men who are not related, who their father spends time with, and they see that this is what a good man is. They see the different types of good men. You know, some are more loud, some are more quiet. They get to see how to judge men accurately. A big part of the reason that women today are so terrible at judging men is because they've never spent any time around them until they find these men that want to sleep with them in their late teens or mid-teens in a lot of cases. They'll find these men, suddenly they want to sleep with them. And that's the only exposure they have, is to men who are trying to get laid. And so they have this warped view of men. They've not had a chance to develop good patriarchal relationships with men that are protective of them, but have no sexual interest in them.
We might go over to the entropy questions and super chats now. I've been too preoccupied with my own follow-up questions to get to the audience questions. Senator Slayer has asked, why do women suck at comedy? Well, there's some good female comics like the late Joan Rivers. She was hilarious, but what's your opinion on that? Because that's an internet meme, women aren't funny.
I guarantee you, if you did a blood test on all the women comics and you arranged the test based on testosterone levels, the women in the top 10% of testosterone would be the only funny ones. And the others would be the ones we don't count as being funny. Joan Rivers, she was definitely a masculine-minded woman. And that's why she was funny. She understood what makes men and women laugh, okay? Women have no need to be funny. Men don't value women more because they're funny, unless they're very effeminate. They're kind of valuing masculine traits in a woman then. Men value attractiveness, fertility, kindness, gentleness, sweetness, mother traits, basically. We want to make sure she's a good mother for our kids. That's what we value in women. And because of that, there's never been a sexual selection for funniness in women. On the other hand, men that are funny can diffuse violent situations. You know, they're very useful in the tribe because they can diffuse situations of violence between tribal members, between you and the out group. And women understand that those men end up with important roles. They're mediators. They're go-betweens. Everybody likes the funny guy. Plus, the funny guy is probably smart, because you got to be fairly smart to be funny. You know, many of the top comedians, especially you'll see this, a lot of the British top comedians, they have like a degree in some advanced science degree as well as being comedians, because there is a connection between intelligence and comedy.
Quick wit, people don't appreciate what such a skill that is, because comedy is also reactive, and it's primarily men who are good at that.
Yeah, and that reactive improvisational thinking is very much a man's thing. Women women do like to be surprised and all that. They want someone else to surprise them. Women are creatures of routine. Men often, we would go out of the village and every day was a different adventure. I don't know what we're going to hunt. We don't know if we're going to get hunted while we're out there. We don't know what's going to happen. And so had to be super improvisational. A fight is basically an improvisation. You don't fight according to a plan. You fight according to improvisation. Even a battle between two groups is mostly improvised. And so men, we either were good at improvisation or we died. And so it was bred out. The men that are bad at it was generally bred out throughout history. And so this is especially outside of the Indus Valley areas where things were stable. If you go into Europe where things were Siberia, the same thing, where things were very unstable, men had to be very good at improvising. Africa, the same way. Why do you think a lot of the top jazz players are black? Is because they lived in an environment for thousands of years where you could be walking down the street and you're getting chased by a lion. You got to improvise how you're going to escape, how you're going to get out of things. You never know what's going to happen next. You got to be great at improvising. And the men who couldn't, they died. It was selected against.
We've got another question from Bieber Anti-Bullying. Noah, what do you think about the influence of the book, The Authoritarian Personality, on feminism, and its conclusion that father-led families had to be eliminated because they led to fascism?
I don't see the problem with that. What it is communists write books against fascists, and they will use whatever excuse they can make up to say fascism bad. And to some degree, you'll see it go the other way too. When people don't like an idea and they're ideologically committed to the opposite idea, they will do everything they can to make that idea bad. And what they do is they'll look at it, what supports it, and they'll knock those things out. I live in a country that had a fascist dictator a little over 30 years ago. No, almost 40 years ago now. And the thing that people say they wished was still around from that time was the better structure in the family. That's the number one thing that I hear people say. Families were better back then. There's other things that people liked about that time, but that's one of the main things. And the reason is in general, fascist governments understand that they need to have, fascism is about structure, high levels of structure. And so you can't structure chaotic people. So you need to have people that are raised in structure, which means raised with a healthy masculine father who gives them structure. Otherwise, you can't sustain that kind of a state. Whereas communism is, to a certain extent, it's about chaos, and that can be good. If you're good at managing chaos in chaotic situations, your group will do well. This is why the communists are always trying to stir up trouble. They're good at the chaos part. They're good at dealing with chaos. Whereas the people more on the right, the people that are more conservative, even the fascist people, they do better with structure. And so they always are seeking structure, whereas the communists tend to seek chaos. But it's the attack on everything that is structure in the West is designed to weaken us. I mentioned before that male feminists want feminism because it makes women easy targets. Enemy nations want your nation to be chaotic and communistic because it makes you an easy target for them.
Yeah, definitely.
It's an act of war. It's an act of war. When a country promotes communism in your country, it's an act of war.
We've got a couple of super chats here from Senator Slayer, both for $3 US. Thank you. The first one is fuck whores. I'm not sure if he's saying fuck. Is
that in the positive, like what you're planning to do, or
is he? Is he saying that as in?
Because then you're contributing to the problem.
They're not a good influence on our society.
Yeah, it's probably a negative comment against them. Absolutely. And we can say, well, men should just not have sex with them, and that's a good place to start. But there's always going to be some men out there that will satisfy the whore-making requirement. There's always going to be some guys out there who will take advantage of that. What you need is women need to be raised with sufficient fatherhood investment. men have no reason right now to invest into their families unless it is something that is compelling them from inside, or they are Christian or even Muslim men or whatever it is that have a religious reason. The old deal where you invest into the woman and it's a lifelong commitment and everything is going to have this long level of return, that's pretty much gone. If we want men to invest into their wives, invest into their children, and stick around and raise more masculine generations of men, we need to incentivize them to do so, which means returning to the old deal. You know, the more feminine men are, the more masculine women will be, and vice versa. The more masculine men are, the more feminine women will react to that. There are women and men who are so damaged they won't react, but we need to start raising the children right. There is nothing we can do about the Karens and the 30-year-old thoughts. They're just going to time out. They'll die at some point. Most of them are overweight. They'll die young. What we need to focus on is children. You know, those of us who are nervous about having kids, because it is kind of scary to get married and have kids in 2020. You know, you can get married, the woman wants to leave you, takes all your stuff. We have to find ways to mitigate that danger. I have no fear at all that I will get divorced. My wife, it is not part of her personality makeup to divorce me. She also understands consequences, and that I would make sure that it was unpleasant, the situation. And as men, we have to start being dangerous again. And that might mean being dangerous towards governments which are taking our rights away as men, which are interfering with our ability to protect our wives and children, even sometimes protecting them from their own bad decisions. And it's going to be a rough road for us as men. It's always been a rough road for us as men. You know, when our ancestors were hunting woolly mammoths with a sharp stick, the guy who went, "Oh, this looks too hard, I don't think I'm going to do it," he got kicked out of the tribe very quickly because he was useless. It's hard is not an excuse for men. No one's asking us to risk our lives. We're being told, "Oh, you might have some financial ramifications." Figure out how to manage that so it doesn't happen.
Do you think that's also why there's been this rise in homosexual relationships? Because both men and women, it's too harder a project to, basically, and they fear the expectation from the opposite gender to enter the marriage and family project. Or there's also the MGTOW movement.
I've talked to a lot of homosexuals about this situation, and almost all of them were groomed at a very young age. Some of them not by another homosexual, but they had access to gay pornography or whatever. They groomed themselves, kind of. They were almost all groomed at a very young age. And, you know, you want to create a bonsai, you take a very small plant and you bend it whatever direction you want, and that's what it gets. Is that the natural way the bonsai would look? No, but it's been groomed that way. Some bonsais are going to be easier to groom than others, but I do believe it's the result of grooming. I believe the reason that it's becoming more common is we're having more and more young boys who are raised without a father, who will put the guy in a coffin if he bothers their son. And because of that, more young boys are vulnerable to being preyed on by gay men, which in turn creates more people with that kind of an interest, and many of those who are abused will end up being gay. Not all, but many. And so it's a very negative cycle, and it's another cycle that would be protected against with a healthy patriarchy. Not all patriarchies, by the way, protected children. The ones that protected children better were generally more competitive and would win out over the ones that didn't, because the women, for example, would be raised healthy. They'd be better at being mothers. The sons would be more psychologically sound. They would be better at providing and protecting for the community. So they usually outcompeted the internally predatory patriarchies. But yeah, we don't, young boys don't have a man around anymore. And there's no, if you're a pedophilic predator, there are all kinds of kids they can prey on where there's no consequences. And that's a self-reproducing problem. It's terrible in society right now. Children deserve to be having the protection of the patriarchy.
The other super chat from Senator Slayer is it true that prostitutes are cleaner than women at bars?
The thing with it depends. Almost all prostitutes, I know this from when you work in the kind of job I have, you have to study everything that's connected with that. And prostitutes are in the sexual marketplace. This is again, that's another people. Women are competing with prostitutes, and prostitutes don't Me Too you. So it's I have to know all of what's happening. Now, prostitutes are almost all on drugs, and it is not the prostitution that usually ends up making them sick. It's the often injection drug use. So a lot of them are on meth now, keeps them thin, and that is your big problem. The other problem is that a lot of prostitutes aren't selling sex. They're just trying to trick you to get you in a room where they can, someone can knock you out and take your stuff. So it is a very big risk. The safest place for a man or a woman to have sex is in a marriage. My wife said I do. I said I do. That's all of the consent we needed. She's not going to Me Too me. I'm not going to Me Too her. She's always around. So, sex is abundant and relatively easy to get and abundant. And when you have sex with the same person for multiple years, you get really good at it. You understand each other. This random sex with strangers, trying to make it a little better by, should I have with that woman or that woman? It's a losing proposition. It's not going to get you ahead as a man. All the statistics say that married men have much better sex lives than single men. And I absolutely believe it I talk to a lot of men and women intimately about their lives as part of my job. And absolutely, I see that. Every time I'm done talking to lonely people, I thank God that I have a good, happy marriage and that, I have a good wife and I have somebody there all the time. And once you're married long enough, it's not that you don't put any work in anymore, but you get to work so well together that you have this lovely inertia, and it's not a constant slog to get her attention. It becomes easy after a while.
Let's talk about your life and relationship coaching. Obviously, for clients to entrust you and potential clients want to know more about you. Obviously, you practice what you preach. You're happily married with 3 sons. I noticed on your website that people sometimes misunderstand what a life or relationship coach is, that they can just give them the magic formula. All you can do is equip them better to improve themselves. It's got to come from them ultimately.
Absolutely. The number one reason that people are they're not in a relationship that's making them happy is not that they even don't know how. It's that they lack correct motivations. So sometimes they want something that conflicts with them having a happy relationship. And we have to work on that. We have to balance your desires. The easy one is that the woman wants independence and equality, or even the man. You'd be surprised how many men want an equal relationship because they think it's less work. The woman's going to provide half the income. The woman's going to do half of everything. And I'm not going to have to put a lot of work in. And, this is going to be easy. So I help people take these conflicting desires and sort and organize them. I mentioned earlier that a father helps his children to sort and organize their chaotic mind. Most people haven't had that, partially because a lot of men today don't understand how to raise their children. I've had a lot of clients, a repeat phrase they say is, I wish my father had set stronger boundaries for me as a child. I wish my dad had told me not to have sex with men, until I had a relation, like a commitment, marriage, or at least engaged. And most women wish their father had been more involved and more active in protecting them. So they come to me and I help them to structure their mind that they didn't get from their father. Same with men. A lot of men, they don't know how to approach a woman. I had the advantage that I was encouraged to approach people in general since I could talk. So I'd be 2 years old. I'd be at the shopping mall. My dad would be waiting for my mom to buy something, and I'd be playing at the little things at the shopping mall, and I'd see a beautiful woman, and I'd go up to her and I'd start talking to her, and I'd just randomly do that. And so now talking to women, it's just a thing. It's like breathing. It's easy. And most men don't have that. They don't understand how to talk to women. They have not done it enough to be comfortable with it. And their father never taught them how to do it. And so I help them with these type of things. I help them to get what they want. Most of my male clients double their income within a year to 2 years of starting coaching.
That's
my
pretty
female
impressive.
clients. Yeah, a lot of female clients come to me because they want to end a relationship. If you're a woman and you want to end a relationship, generally the first person you're going to talk to is your mother and father. Why? Because you're going to need their support to leave. Because women are very dependent on men generally, much more than they think they are. So you're going to ask your mom and dad. If you can't do that because you don't have a mom and dad, or your mom and dad are not useful for that purpose, they're not, maybe they're boomers and all they think about is themselves, then you'll come to someone like me and I will help you to figure out that process. I'll talk you through the process of it. And so it's very much providing the wisdom, the knowledge, the motivation, the empathy and concern that you would have gotten from your father if you had one that was capable of providing those things for you.
Now, you mentioned, in addition to the life and relationship coaching on your website, that you want to foster a online community, and you mentioned obviously red pilled. Most of this audience know what red pilled is, which is seeing reality how it actually is, and part of that is seeing in this context patriarchy as a good thing rather than the negative that you've been fed with the blue pill. And there's also the black pill, which means that you basically have no hope of anything, and then there's the white pill when you see an optimistic chance for change. You also talk about that it's for case-selected individuals, and I've heard of the RK selection theory before, but can you just give a brief rundown of what that is and why you included that in the description?
So the RK selection theory was originally applied to the animal kingdom. There are creatures that their primary it's a reproductive strategy. So their primary strategy, if they are selected, is to have a lot of offspring with very little investment in each one. A good example is a fish that lays 1,000 eggs and they just float down the river, and 99% of them get eaten, but a couple will mature into animals that reproduce as well. On the other hand, you have case-selected species such as wolves. Or I think probably that's one of the better examples. Chimps are the ultimate example of a case-selected species. And in those species, there's a high level of investment in offspring, but very few offspring. The offspring usually need to be trained. There's usually some sort of a community culture. Wolves do have a kind of a culture. They will behave differently in different packs depending on how the interactions of their ancestors were, of the parents and grandparents. And so these are high investment species. Now, that's applied as a model to humans, and it is an imperfect model. All models are imperfect. That's part of why it makes them a model. If you had a perfect model, you would actually have reality. It would just be looking at reality. But the model is useful because it simplifies complex behavior in ways that we can understand more easily. So the RK selection theory model, when applied to humans, says that there are people whose reproductive strategy is based on the spray and pray method. I have sex with as many women as possible. Hopefully I'll impregnate some of them, and hopefully some of those kids won't turn out to be complete losers that don't reproduce. Or I'm going to pick one woman, I'm going to have a half dozen kids with her, we're going to raise them really well, and I'm going to make sure every one of them is capable of reproducing because they're raised well and they can make their own families, and they're mentally and psychologically and physically sound. Those are the two extremes of the spectrum. Another way to think about it is the pack and the herd. So a herd is a large group of indifferentiated people. You will see this if you see a very far leftist crowd of people. They all kind of look the same. They're very, very similar in how they look. They're all trying to rebel, but they're all rebelling in the exact same direction. And what ends up happening is you have this herd there. So you take one of the herd members out, it's not a problem. The rest of the herd doesn't care. You can join that herd real easy. Just look like them and join them, and they don't care. They're very indiscriminate. Then you have the pack. So you'll have a small group of people that work very closely together, that are very wary of outsiders, that have a lot of in-group preference. You can't join that group. Think of a gang, for example. You don't join that group unless you are committed and you have got skin in the game. It's very hard to get in. On the other hand, the rewards of being in the group are high. They'll look after you. You attack the herd scatters because they're willing to sacrifice one member. He gets eaten. Feminists are like that. They put women in danger by taking good, strong men out of the community so that they can't protect women and children. And each of them are thinking, it's not going to happen to me. It's going to happen to one of those other women. I'm going to get all the benefits and someone else is going to get eaten. So you have this pack and this herd strategy that very much are what the R and K selection is. And it does kind of line up to right and left, although I've met right-wing people who are rather R selected and left-wing people who are more K selected, but it kind of makes that dichotomy as well. Depending on the situation in life, R selection or K selection is more useful. When there's an abundance of resources and very little predation, R selection means you have a lot of kids and they just kind of go off and do their thing, and it's good for you because you reproduce quickly. There's unlimited resources, which is what we've created in the last 100 years, unlimited resources. Therefore, we have a K shift, or an R shift. We've shifted towards R. When resources are scarce and we have to compete for them, wolves competing against rabbits, wolves will always win. There's not even a contest. When the K selected have to compete with the R selected, the numbers of R selected collapse quickly, whereas the R selected has very little attrition. Very few of them will be lost. And we're heading now into a time of challenge and difficulty. We're already seeing a K shift. Some feminists came out with a cookbook for feminists, and they're all dressed very traditionally in the cookbook. And they're all talking about, we're gonna smash the patriarchy by making them sandwiches. We can't let go of our rhetoric, but we realize we were wrong, and we need to have a useful skill that doesn't involve us being naked. And so they're trying to figure out how to add value. And this is the K shift, and it's going to we're only at the beginning. We haven't even hit the bottom of the R yet. We're going to see a real K shift in the next few years.
That reminds me of a comedy show about 15 years ago where these group of feminists, they'd found a way to reproduce without men and say they could be self-sufficient, but then they try to open a jar and they can't.
Yeah. If all the women in the world disappeared tomorrow, men would immediately put all resources into figuring out how to create artificial wombs to save the species. And our goal would be to produce as many women as possible to make up the difference. So we were back again to men and women being relatively equal in number. If all the men in the world disappeared tomorrow, women would fight over the last stuff until it was all gone. And then they would starve to death and die. It wouldn't last a generation. The reason being is that all of the infrastructure in the world is built and maintained by men, and not just any kind of men. The hard infrastructure, the oil wells, the massive sewage systems, the huge constructions, the guys who climb onto the electrical towers and make sure that when you flick on the light switch, electricity flows through your house. That's almost exclusively men. And exclusively, it's very masculine, very hard, like practically wild men. These are not, oil roughnecks are not your average guy. These are a very special breed of men. And actually, we're having less and less of these men all the time. Society is pushing them to the fringes. They're not integrating, encouraged to integrate as they used to be. And so we're having less and less of these men, and we're going to see societal collapse if we don't start honoring the contribution of these men once again.
We spoke about Karens before. That's been a recent internet phenomena. But another term that's emerged recently from the internet gendered lingo is simp, and it was popularized by PewDiePie, who we'd say is one of the more alpha YouTubers out there. So I'll allow you to give the definition.
Yeah, a simp is, there's an overlap between simps and omegas, if you know what the social sexual hierarchy is. But what a simp is basically a man who will do anything for female attention, which he usually doesn't end up getting. And this is basically boys who are raised by mothers, who, a lot of single mothers aren't just single mothers, they're also incompetent at mothering. They're incompetent at doing the things that would have kept a man with them, which happen to be the same things that make you a good mother, like looking after the house and cooking and cleaning and being nice and being kind and gentle. So they also make terrible mothers generally. And what ends up happening is you have millions or hundreds of millions of young men who are raised without enough feminine attention as children. They don't get their full of mothering. And now every single woman that they meet that gives them the slightest bit of attention becomes a goddess to them, and they start worshiping these women. And simping is false religion of feminism, basically. It's a worship of women, and it is completely destructive to men. Women hate it. Women want to be told no. They want to be benevolently dominated. They don't want a guy they can push around. They don't respect a man they can push around. Now, they'll take his money. Someone I was reading on Twitter, and he was saying that the kind of girls that work online doing like cam girls and stuff like that, they hate the men that phone in and give them money. They detest them because
Insta thoughts or e-girls,
yeah,
as they're known.
Yeah, they'll smile at you and take your money, but they hate your guts. Men who stand up to women in a benevolent way, of course, not just to be an asshole. Women don't like assholes. A lot of men think they do. What they're confusing is that healthy women don't like assholes. They're confusing dominance play for being an asshole, and that happens to men who don't understand how to show dominance in a benevolent way. But women will test men. They don't want to win those tests. They want the man to win, because they know if they can dominate you, so can every man, which means they have a weak man. Women don't want a weak man. They want a strong man. Several women would rather share a strong man than have to settle for a weak man. And a lot of women find out that they end up having to settle for a weak man because they've spent their entire life tearing men down. By the time they get 30, 35 years old, all that's left is weak men. And they end up having to take one of them.
Another term that's thrown around, which I have my own definition of, is mangina, which I classify as basically a man who has the emotional erraticness of a woman and acts on impulse and emotion when, say, posting on social media. They are heterosexual, but the relationships they enter into with women, it's more like girlfriends hanging out rather than a traditional patriarch relationship. I'm not sure if you agree with.
Yeah, if you have a 5-year-old boy, that 5-year-old boy is still very chaotic. 5-year-old kids are not full agency and already thinking clearly. They're children. They're practically a baby at 5 years old, and the 5-year-olds that have that kind of chaotic emotional responses, as a parent, that's fine. We understand that. That's part of who they are. If you're still doing that at 25, you got a problem. You cannot behave at 25 the way you did at 5 years old. You take all your chaos mixed with a man's body, and now you have a dangerous situation. This is why women are at much greater risk from these kind of men than they are from masculine men. Masculine men that are capable of doing a lot more damage are less likely to actually do any damage because we're well adjusted. We're happy and calm in who we are, and we don't feel the need to have these emotional outbursts. But again, it goes back to, why does a man end up in that position? Because his father never helped him to tame the chaos in his own mind, to give order and structure to his mind. And because of that, even as an adult, he can't do it to himself. You can't teach yourself that. Now, men do have an advantage, is that even as a man, you can get into a male group. But used to be you could join the military, although that's become awfully gay and effeminate. But you, in many cases anyway, it's become more of a make work program for women, like every other part of the government. But you can still join male groups. There are male groups out there, sports teams, other places where men are going to help you add structure to that chaos. They're going to help you fix the deficiencies that your father left you with. Women have a real hard time because there's no groups like that they can join. Joining a group of women isn't going to help them structure their mind, because that's structuring is what men do for women, usually for their daughters, but also even for their wives. Women don't want a chaotic man. They want a structured man, because this allows them to indulge their feelings a bit. They go up and down their feelings. Men, we go up and down a little bit, but it's a very small sine wave. Women's sine wave is much greater, and it orbits the man's emotions. So if your emotional level is going from a 3 to a 5, she's going to go from a 0 to an 8, But if you're the one going from 0 to 8, she's right off the charts having a mental breakdown, because you're not there to help her stabilize her emotions. A lot of guys will say, oh, heck with that. That's a lot of work. But, that's part of the cost of having a woman in your life, is that you have to help her with her emotions.
Well, I think tonight we've done a thorough exploration of frank differences and complementary differences between the genders, and what sort of behaviors are needed to make that complement work. And I encourage everybody to check out your website for more information. Maybe even if they don't need coaching, it's worth just checking out just for your thoughts as well. So it's smv4k.com. And is the Patriarch Hour back this week on the Rational Rise TV channel?
Yes, absolutely. Now we're doing it on, and where I am, it's Thursday afternoon. So I think that is Friday morning for you, something like that. What you should do, if you want to find it for sure, is follow James Fox Higgins show on YouTube, and click the bell notification, and then when it is scheduled, you're going to get the notice for it.
Clicking the bell on all of our channels, that's what you've got to do now, because YouTube, if you don't click receive all notifications, channels such as mine and James's, they'll make sure they won't tell you.
Yeah, it allows them to promote the channels that are big corporate ones, so that you're basically getting all the stuff you would have got on TV before, but now it's on YouTube. So they want to promote the big guys. So if you want to listen to the independent people, you have to put a little extra effort in.
And thank you for giving us your time tonight. I know how busy you are, and you have, it's a fantastic online diary booking system. I was so impressed with it. So that means you always keep your commitments, which is, it's great. I think, period.
Yeah, it's the only way you can organize yourself, is to have structure and order, and wherever that happens to be, in your mind, in your environment. So it's I really enjoy that system. You can see exactly when I'm available. You can see your options for what kind of a interaction you want to have with me, and then you can book it from there. And I just get a notice that, hey, in 4 hours I got a client, and then I'll sign on.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's perfect, as they say. All right, I will enjoy the rest of your, looks like daytime there. And
it's almost lunchtime.
Will you enjoy your lunch? I'm about to knock off for tea now. It's dinner time here. So I'll get to that in a moment. But take care, and I'll tune into the Patriarch Hour when eventually it pops up into my notifications on YouTube, hopefully.
Excellent. Yeah, and the new time that's going to be at this week is where we're going to continue to do it.
Okay, great. All right. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tim. Have a great week.
And that's the conclusion of our featured interview for tonight. I'll just finish off in the last 10 minutes before XYZ begins, because obviously it's still very busy in the news cycle. Obviously, in Australia, we are on the mend with the coronavirus recovery phase. The curve is still pretty flat. There's a lot of attention given to an outbreak at a Victorian meat processing facility. The Andrews government, they wouldn't reveal which meat processor, but the meat processor decided to out themselves at Cedar Meats in Brooklyn. It's currently linked with 34 cases of coronavirus, and of course the media have said this is a huge spike, and of course it's given Daniel Andrews a justification if he wants to extend the state of emergency beyond May the 11th and keep us all under house arrest. We've got another National Cabinet meeting tomorrow, which apparently Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, is going to join. I guess we are getting back to basics with the Australian Constitution, and including the state of New Zealand in our national cabinet meeting. Jacinda Ardern has now talked about she might go to level 2 restrictions now, which I think would be pleasing because New Zealand went up to level 4 restrictions, which meant that even McDonald's and KFC were shut. There were checkpoints everywhere. I know that Daniel Andrews here in Victoria, he wanted to, sort of hyping up that we'd need to go to stage 4, but never happened. But Daniel Andrews is the last holdout in terms of relaxing restrictions. But the Friday National Cabinet meeting is where they're going to be making the ultimate decision about nationwide relaxation of social restrictions. So we shall see, and I'll await with anticipation what the Friday announcement is. The biggest non-coronavirus related news is former North Melbourne coach Dean Laidley being arrested Sunday night and remanded in custody to appear in the Melbourne Magistrates Court on May the 11th. No detail at the time was given about why he was arrested and remanded, though photos leaked from his interrogation in police custody where he was dressed as a woman, and there's been quite rightly outrage at a police inspector has been suspended for disseminating the photos on WhatsApp, and they're going to be charged with privacy offences. The Deputy Commissioner Shane Patton and Police Minister Lisa Neville, they've totally made clear their anger at this breach of privacy and how it's unacceptable, and obviously it means that the LGBT people, they're not going to be pleased that sort of these photos were leaked because they've been on the front page of the Herald Sun, and obviously Dean Laidley being a former AFL coach, there'd be a lot of people who'd been thinking, well, what's happened to him? Senator Slayer was in the chat tonight. He wrote on YouTube, "I'm disgusted with Victoria Police for mocking a transgender civilian by leaking photos of her. This was transphobia. Victoria Police is an anti-LGBT culture. Graham Ashton, I'm very upset." Sad face emoji. Yeah, I'm not sure what the circumstances surrounding his arrest or why he was dressed as a woman, but the takeaway that I get from this development is that we saw another ex-AFL coach, Bomber Thompson. He was on drug charges. That we've seen a lot of ex-AFL players go off the rails, and that is because of the drop down in basically work and stature when you go from an AFL player to retirement and you're just a normal person again. It seems it's the same with AFL coaches as well, now that we have two coaches who've really hit rock bottom in recent times. And this is obvious. The AFL is not unique in this, but basically when your career, a prominent career ends, it fills those people who previously occupied that fulfilling and public career to basically they're unable to cope with basically just integrating into or finding a new life. So it's quite a sad development ultimately. And yeah, as Lisa Neville herself said about the dissemination of these photos on WhatsApp, you'd have to be a fool to think that they were not going to be circulated widely by other people, given the eyebrows raising nature of the photographs. And yeah, it is a breach of privacy. I know people were very curious about why he was arrested, but that of course does not justify the leaking of those photographs. Also, somebody has reminded me that the reason why Jacinta Ardern is joining the National Cabinet meeting tomorrow is to talk about this Trans-Tasman bubble, this trade and international travel arrangement between Australia and New Zealand, since we've largely contained the coronavirus. Well, Tasman nations have always been close, the Anglo-Spear nations of the South Pacific, and obviously that is still continuing. That's all from me for Monday night's show. XYZ Live is up next with David Hiscock and Maddie Rose. And of course, tomorrow night will be the Unshackled, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the Unshackled YouTube and D-Live channel, where it'll be myself, David Hiscock, and Richard Wollstonecroft from the Report from Tiger Mountain. So until then, have a good night, and I will see you tomorrow. Check out my website, timwilms.com, and the unshackled.net for the Unshackled productions and news blog. Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the Unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.